Above all, this aggression is a grave breach of the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2, Paragraph 4, which prohibit the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any member state. Israel also violated Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Permanent Mission of Iraq today formally protested and condemned this violation of its territorial integrity in a letter to the Security Council and the Secretary General. Madam President, those who support this regime with the United States at the forefront must understand that they are complicit by aiding and enabling these crimes, they share full responsibility for the consequences. Supporting Israel today is supporting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and deliberate.
As a final point, general international law imposes two obligations on Israel in relation to the third parties in the OPT. First, Israel shall respect sovereign immunity of states, immunity of state officials, and the diplomatic and consular privileges and immunities of third states. Second, Israel cannot exercise sovereign power in the OPT, including any attempt to prohibit UNRWA's presence and activity. Such sovereign powers rest exclusively with the Palestine. Mr. President, the Palestinian people face no greater urgent threat than deprivation of humanitarian assistance. While the court advisory opinion of July 2024 still echoes, the reality of occupied Palestinian territory remains grim. Occupation continues and the starvation persists. The desperate eyes of Gaza's children pierce our conscience with two burning questions. Will international law surrender to the brute force? Will the pillars of civilization yield before the law of jungle?
This is Job chapter 20 and verse 4. And it reads, Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen them shall say, Where is he? I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rokah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. All right, I'd like to go into a lesson based on the clip you just saw of China's response to the state of Israel's attack on Iran. All right, and some of the key things that they pointed out, chiefly the hypocrisy on the global stage. You know, the world is witnessing a hypocrite at work. You know, and we understand this according to prophecy, all right, that the wicked is being revealed. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that, when I was yet with you, I told you these things. So you think about our apostles and elders, you know, and their elders before them, you know, bringing out this word and identifying Esau, Edom, as the so-called white man as he's known today. All right, the so-called white man's biblical nationality is Esau, Edom. Whether they live in the state of Israel, whether they live in Russia, whether they live in Germany, whether they live in America Australia, South Africa, their biblical nationality is Edom. And we know according to prophecy, the one that they ignorantly called Jesus, whose name is Yahweh Shai, would come back to a world ruled by Edom. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 6 and verse 9. For Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. All right, so what we're witnessing through the Spirit is the wicked being revealed. You know, the apostles and elders, brothers have been bringing this word out. And one of the things that, you know, the slander, you know, when you deal with what these people say about us as Israelites is that we call the so-called white man the devil. All right, well, his actions speak louder than our words. And now we're witnessing on the world stage, other nations begin to call out the hypocrisy of the so-called white man. All right, and this shows you who the scriptures is talking about concerning the wicked being revealed and the joy of that hypocrite being for a moment. All right, let's go here. This is Job chapter 34. All right, and I want to get this verse first, and then I'll deal with the discussion and what this speech was really opening and bringing to light is that the UN, you know, the G7, the NATO, all of these groups that they've put together to put up this front of fairness and equality amongst nations is a farce. All right. It was symbolic. All right. It was a symbolic form of progress, because in actuality, the so-called white man rules in these organizations with impunity. You know, he has this exceptionist viewpoint where everybody else can be called a terrorist and held accountable, except for the so-called white man in America and the so-called white man in the state of Israel. All right, this is Job chapter 34 and verse 29. When he giveth quietness, who then can make trouble? And when he hideth his face, who then can behold him, whether it be done against a nation or against a man only? Which shows you that the Lord not only judges men on a personal level, but he also judges nations of people. All right. Egypt was a perfect example during the first Exodus. The firstborn of every Egyptian died, not just Pharaoh, even though Pharaoh was the one making the decisions. Verse 30 reads that the hypocrite reign not, lest the people be ensnared. And see, the world is witnessing a hypocrite in rulership, and it sets a bad precedent. Because if the world sees a hypocrite at rulership, a wicked ruler, all right, in power without consequence, the world is going to be ensnared into believing that they can live wickedly, whether it be a man or a nation of people, that they can do the same things that they see the so-called white man doing without consequence. That's why the Lord is going to make the judgment of Esau, Edom as a nation of people public, lest the people be ensnared. You know, now what I thought was beautiful through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shai Shai is that, you know, the Chinese spokesperson basically pointed out in great detail how the UN, how the Security Council, how they deal very exceptionist when it comes to the state of Israel and their crimes. For those who have been keeping up with history, or I wouldn't even call it history, but current events concerning maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the Israelis assassinated someone in the state of Iran. Basically, it was a Hamas leader. They went over to Iran to have talks, and Israel invaded that territory, that sovereignty, by killing somebody in Iran's land. Now, this is an offense. This is a war crime. If any other nation did that, they would be brought to trial and held accountable concerning the Security Council and the United Nations. That was the whole reason that they put these organizations together. And now what the world is witnessing is that the so-called white man does not keep his word. Now, this is something Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans already know all too well. But all of these nations made a confederacy with the so-called white man, and they assumed that he would treat them fairly. Well, he didn't. All right. And who will pity a charmer that's bitten by a serpent? All right. Because all these nations made a confederacy with Edom. All right. Let's go to this. This is Psalms chapter 83 And I'll start at the top. Psalms 83:1, a song or psalm of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O power. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And this is talking about the nation of Israel, the Hebrew Israelites, not the Israelis. All right. The world knows the state of Israel, but the nation of Israel, the actual Israelites, are hidden under proverbs and bywords like Black, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, West Indian, Haitian, spooks, porch monkeys, wetbacks, all of these proverbs and bywords. All right. Which is why it said that they have taken crafty counsel against thy hidden ones. Because in this world, we're hidden. The world believes that the nation of the so-called, I'll say, the Israelis, they believe that the Israelis are the people of the Heavenly Father, are the people of God, and they're not. They're just so-called white people who have appropriated Israelite culture. You know, they put the Bible and the Torah in front of people, but they really worship the Talmud. And when you go into the details of that book, it's a wicked book. All right, now back to the point, verse 5, it says, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, all right, the so-called white man, and the Ishmaelites, all right, which are the so-called Arabs, all right, of Moab and the Hagarenes, all right, Moab going into the so-called Chinese, Gabal and Ammon and Amalek. All right, Amalek is the chief house of Edom. All right, the small hats, for those who read between the lines. Those people that dwell in the state of Israel, in the land of Israel, who say they are Jews and are not. They are actually from the tribe of Amalek, which is the chief house of the nation of Edom. All right, continuing. It says, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Ashur also is joined with them. They have hope in the children of Lot, Salah. All right. Now, the reason I'm bringing this out is because you have to remember all of these nations made a deal with Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. They all made a deal. They all were in confederate with the so-called white man concerning taking us down. This is why we don't have any pity for these nations and what they're experiencing from the so-called white man, because now he's turned the tables on them. And while the Chinese are bringing out, all right, the so-called Chinese are bringing out the hypocrisy of the so-called white man in America and the so-called white man in the state of Israel, and these organizations that say that they're for the equality of nations, but are not, they've all made a deal with this man. You know, they all set up a deal to get a little piece of this pie, because every nation benefited from us being on the bottom. Now that serpent is beginning to bite them. And we're watching this confederacy be destroyed. All right. And this is and it's ultimately going to end up in World War III. All right. This is Daniel chapter 2. And I'm going to jump down to verse 43. All right. And it reads, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So they created all these organizations, but none of them profited. You know, you think about the Security Council, you think about the United Nations. On paper, it seems like a legitimate organization. All right. If any nation has a grievance, they can come to the United Nations and they can handle it through diplomacy. Well, just like Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans have learned, the world is now learning that the so-called white man doesn't keep his word. He's a truce breaker. And they're finding this out the hard way. And ultimately, the Lord is using these events to bring about prophecy, because World War III will ensue. All right. Russia also spoke out against this attack against Iran because, again, you have to remember this attack was unprovoked. Iran did nothing to provoke this attack. It just happened out of nowhere. Similar to the whole Pearl Harbor situation, where it was a so-called surprise attack. Now, when you do your research on it, you understand that it's deeper than rap. But to the Iranians, that's what this is likened unto, a surprise attack that was unprovoked. They had just left negotiations with the Americans, and now the Americans pulled their people out of the Middle East, and it comes to find out why. Because they attacked. They did a surprise attack, man. And this shows you the hypocrisy. No other nation can get away with this. Imagine a nation surprise attacking Babylon the Great, which is America, and then telling the Americans, don't respond. Don't retaliate. And see, the world is watching this. It's no longer people just believing what they hear. The world is witnessing the hypocrisy of Esau, Edom. And this is why ultimately it's going to end up in war. Because when diplomacy fails, you automatically go into war. War is the result of a lack of diplomacy, a lack of an ability to solve and settle issues with a conversation and compromise. All right, it's Joel chapter 3 and verse 9. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. And that's what you see happening on the world stage. All right. You don't see a lot of nations just going along with the get along. You're starting to see more nations speak up against what's happening on the world stage. And this is just another upon many other conflicts that are happening all across the planet, from Africa, all right, to Ukraine. All right. The conflict that's still happening in the state of Israel, not including Iran when you deal with the so-called Palestinians. All of these conflicts are happening simultaneously, and it's really exposing Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, for who he actually is. That wicked is being revealed. All right. And it started off with the Lord calling him out through the spirit and through the mouth of the prophets, through his spirit and the mouth of the prophets. All right. This 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Because when you look at the actions of the so-called white man, it's obvious to see who the wicked is, who the son of perdition is. All right. When you deal with that red horse. All right. Revelation chapter 6 and verse 4. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they shall kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And a great sword is just a parabolic for instruments of death. A gun can be a sword. So Esau, the so-called white man, is being given great power to kill, whether it be through missiles, through drones, all right, through tanks. And he's successfully taken peace from the earth. When you look at all of these conflicts, they all have a common denominator. They all have a common denominator, and it's being exposed now. That's why in Isaiah, the 25th chapter, it says this, Isaiah 25 and 7, and he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over all nations. All right. And that veil is being taken off, and the world is seeing it. The world is witnessing it. You know, when you look at the response from China, when you look at the response from Russia, it's obvious that the world is witnessing the hypocrisy. And why is that important? Because when these nations figure out that they can't go to the United Nations and get justice, what are they going to do? As the weak, they're going to say, I'm strong. And what is Russia at this point? According to prophecy, Russia is a guard unto these other nations. And all this does is fuel the desire for these other nations to join the Russians, because they're witnessing hypocrisy at its height. You're talking about an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation of people. And instead of condemning it, it's a crime according to the United Nations, this is an organization these so-called white people created. And now they're rewriting the rules, and the nations are witnessing this. And all this is another reason of many for these nations to begin to join the Russians, because they realize that those Israelis will never be held accountable for their actions, that they can indiscriminately bomb women and kids and not be held accountable at least a little bit. The world is witnessing this. And that's why ultimately the Lord is doing this. All right. The Lord is beginning to make Esau bare and expose him as the wicked, which is going to result in World War III. All right. Esau's going to come down with great violence when he realized that his deception no longer works. All right. This is Job 14:5. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee, that has appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. So he has an expiration date. All right. And he realizes that he has but a short time. All right. This is Revelation chapter 12:12. All right. When I said expiration date, the Lord numbered every kingdom. They had a set time to rule. Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, had a set time to rule. And then the Lord will begin to visit his sins and his iniquity. And now we're witnessing the Lord begin to bring truth into the earth, and it's exposing the so-called white man for who he is and not who he has pretended to be. And the reason I'm using these general terms of the so-called white man is because the world has been taught to believe that nationality is determined by where you're born, when really it goes back to the seed of your fathers. And the so-called white man, for the most part, the majority of them descend from Esau, Edom. And it's not according to their color per se. Color is an indicator. It's according to their actions. Because you have some of our people, Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who are the Israelites, that look like so-called white people, that look like so-called Chinese people, but they're not the majority. The majority of the so-called white men, their biblical nationality is Esau, Edom, and they are the devil that the Bible speaks of. They are the wicked as described in the scriptures. And their actions are speaking louder than our words. We're witnessing literally on a global stage an act of hypocrisy, where the so-called white man is trying to convince everybody that they didn't see what they saw. All right, this is Revelation 12:12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So the moment Esau begins to realize that these press releases and these excuses for his wickedness are no longer working, he's going to go to his primary weapon, which is violence. We just read in Revelation, the 6th chapter, that he was given a great sword. And he's using it. And it's being revealed. You know, you got Israelites that still believe that Esau is the so-called Arabs. They're not living by the sword. All right. They're not the nation that's living by the sword. Who is the so-called white man? When you deal with the so-called white man in America, you're talking about the strongest military the world has ever seen in human history. If not, where and who is he? If this isn't the wicked, where and who is he? Under the so-called white man's rulership, the only thing he's been able to do successfully is create greater instruments of destruction. And now the world is waking up to this. All right. And that's why you see these taunting proverbs begin to pour out. All right. This Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee? And thou shalt be for booties unto them. Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee. Because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, and of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stones shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establisheth a city by iniquity. And that is how the so-called white man has attained the power that we see in the world today. It wasn't through equity. It wasn't through fairness. Even after he destroyed and cut off many people, he put up this front by creating the United Nations and the NATO and all of these different groups in order to, as they put it, handle things between nations diplomatically, only to now find out that it was all set up as a front. They didn't mean any of it. All right, because again, our history speaks well to this. We know this. Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. The so-called white man does not keep his word. He's a truce breaker. He says certain things, and when it's convenient for him, he goes behind it. And this is why the scriptures describe him as the hypocrite and the wicked. And Malachi describes him as the territory or the border of wickedness. And now we're witnessing it on a world stage. All right. And that's why we pray to Yahweh Shema Shai. All right. That these prophecies continue. All right. Because a part of prophecy is that the so-called white man as a nation of people will be taken out of power. All right. This is Psalms 140:11. It says, let not an evil speaker be established in the earth. Evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow him. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's starting with these taunting proverbs, but eventually it's going to continue. It's going to escalate. Because, again, contrary to popular belief, World War III is going to happen. And some argue that we're already in the midst of World War III. All right, there's Psalms 140:1. Deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man. Preserve me from the violent man. All right. And the violent man is the so-called white man. As much as he talks shit about our people, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and what we do to each other, what he has done to other nations of people is unmatched concerning the violence and the death toll. Unmatched. He's the only one that's dropped bombs, atomic bombs on people. And now he's the one in a power seat telling people who can and can't have a nuclear weapon. That's hypocrisy at its finest. If anybody should not have nuclear weapons, it's you. Verse 2 reads, which imagine mischiefs in their heart. Continually are they gathered together for war. And this is the only thing the so-called white man does well outside of lying is war. And the world is waking up to this, man. Verse 3, they have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. Salah. And you see it every day on CNN, on Fox News, all of these narratives that they try to use and spin to make their wicked deeds look righteous. Well, the Lord is removing that covering cast and is exposing Esau for who he is, man. This is the wicked. Make no mistake about it. No matter how soft-spoken they may come off as, no matter how much they crouch themselves, understand that this, as a nation of people, this is the wicked. And a lot of our people get confused because they may have a cordial conversation or a cordial relationship with someone who looks like a so-called white man, or a so-called white man for that matter. They'll assume that all of them are like this, and they're not. That's the front that they put on in front of you. All right. But 7 abominations are in their heart. And you see it, how they operate as a nation of people. It ain't just the Americans that are violent. Look at the state of Israel. Look at what happened when the so-called white man went to Australia. They damn near killed all of the so-called indigenous. When they went to Hawaii, everywhere they go, there's a track record of violence, man. And now they're being exposed for it. All right, it's Jeremiah chapter 49. And I'm going to jump down to verse 10. But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not. And see, he cannot hide himself anymore. They used to be able to hide themselves by dividing their crimes amongst location. Oh, those were the Australians. Those were the South Africans. Oh, those were the Germans. Those were the Americans. Those were the Canadians. Well, when you remove all of those covering casts and you put the so-called white man's history and his crimes in one place, it exposes him for being the wicked on the earth. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rokakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.